take a deep breath. It is that hard. Humans are just much more complicated than it said in the manual. It's really giving yourself grace around that you're not always going to get it right. You're not even going to get it right 95% of the time. But you try and you try different things. And if you can keep focused on the fact that there is a value to trying, the pie just gets bigger. And if you keep adding to the pie, it will be okay at the end. It won't be pretty, but it will be okay.
Welcome to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast, the space where education meets resilience. I'm Dr. Joey Weisler, and in each episode, we dive deep into the personal stories of educators, students, leaders, and frontline advocates who are navigating the complexities within modern education. Whether you're just starting your teaching journey or are a seasoned professional looking for inspiration, we'll explore how to foster meaningful change, prevent burnout, and build trauma-informed communities within our schools. Now, let's take a seat at the front of the classroom as we get started. Today on the Classroom Narratives podcast, I'm joined by Dr. Julie Davelman, who is a clinical psychologist working with adolescents, adults, and families who are navigating stress, transition, and decision-making in real time. Before going into private practice, Dr. Davelman worked as a college counselor and conducted family service evaluations within child protection systems. So she's seen what happens not just in classrooms, but in the systems also surrounding them. What stood out to me when I was working to prepare for this conversation today is her focus on something we don't talk about enough. And that's not just student burnout, not even teacher burnout, but parent burnout, which is something that this podcast certainly needs to cover more avenue of, and the quiet pressure that families are working to carry just to try and get it right, even on the first try. So Dr. Davelman is bringing today this perspective that challenges the idea that there is, quote unquote, one correct way for us to support a child. And instead, she's here today to ask what happens when guilt, expectation, and uncertainty start to shape the decisions that we carry. So Dr. Daveman, thank you for bringing your expertise and welcome to our show from one fellow St. John's Johnny to another.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. So I wanted to go ahead and start with your background, if we could, and if you could tell us a little bit about your background with psychology and some of the work that brings you to our discussion for today.
So I'm in Jersey. I am licensed in both New York and New Jersey because
Saw
once you
that.
have a psychology license, you hold on to those for dear life. I'm going to leave like
Yes.
money in my will to, keep my licenses in perpetuity just
Yeah.
because of how hard it was to get them.
Hmm.
But yeah, I grew up in Brooklyn. I went to school at NYU undergrad and then St. John's for grad school. So I was New Yorker kind of all through and through. I came out of that and a mentor who was on my internship was like, go get licensed. And it is actually a lot easier to get licensed in New York than in New Jersey. I thought I wanted to do community mental health. I thought I wanted to be at a clinic that was hospital based, but like doing outpatient treatment. That's what I thought I wanted to do when I was in grad school. That's what I did as an intern. But that was the year where all the funding for community mental health got cut. But it was also the year of Virginia Tech. And everybody said, oh my God, we have distressed students in colleges. Who knew? And all of a sudden, there was money flooding in to the college counseling programs
Hmm.
because all of a sudden we had this epiphany, maybe we should be doing something. And we weren't necessarily doing it well. We should just look like we're doing something. So I took a job at the College of Staten Island, and I actually worked for a program for kids with financial and academic difficulties. The SEEK program is what it is in the five boroughs. And it is to kind of hold their hands from entry to graduation because they lack the resources, they may lack the academic kind of background. And our graduation rates were the same as the general population of CSI, which was very impressive because we were getting the kids who were either coming in as immigrants, ESL, underprivileged, any number of reasons, right? Because there was both an academic and a financial requirement on the low end to qualify for the program. So we were getting the kids who were least likely to succeed, and they were succeeding at the same rates. So that was really cool. I did that for a couple of years. And then I really wanted to work and live in the same state because I don't know how many times you've done the drive from New Jersey to Staten Island, but it is not necessarily something somebody wants to do several times a day. And so I went to work for a private practice that did psychological evaluations for child protective services. So I got to see that other side of under-resourced and how do you help? The purpose of my evaluations were what does this family need to be able to get back on their feet? What do we need to do to reunify this family with their children? And I wasn't necessarily providing treatment all the time, although some of the time I was, but it was really understanding, what do community resources look like? How do we pull from things that don't look like there's anything to pull from to make things that are necessary for families? So that was that world. And then I was now I'm in private practice, and I see kind of your late teens through adults. I primarily see adults. I do a lot of work on kind of parenting and help, because I have these kind of diverse backgrounds, bringing all of those resources to parents, which is kind of why I thought that would be the interesting conversation to kind of have with you.
Yes. So let's go ahead and start from the beginning of your career, where you were starting to work with college students navigating financial and academic stress. And in our pre-check, we were both talking about our experiences and understanding how the college transition works, where we're working to make sure that students make it to the other side, if you will, in a shape that can allow them to grow, explore, and be vulnerable, yet also still held accountable. So every fall, I've been instructing a course built for students who are admitted into the university on a conditional acceptance. And they're conditionally admitted because they are at risk.
Okay.
So they need my class to actually get into the university. And my job is to use my class as a way to help them explore what college is about, while also keeping tabs in their transition. So when students reach a point where they're trying to navigate a new transition, a new routine, a new life experience, what are you noticing about the foundations that they're coming in with in terms of where are they prepared and where are they already overwhelmed during that time?
So I think it depends quite a bit about what world they come out of and what they've experienced before they got to college, and also why they're in college. Are they in college because they think it's important? Are they in college because their parents said it's not negotiable that they go to college? Are they in college because it's the quote unquote American dream and everyone must go to college? Or could they really not figure out what to do and they kick the can down the line for 4 more years, right? In some ways, college could also be avoidance. So I think that's the first question where I would start. Because if kids are coming in because it is important to them to be in college, they see this as part of their career path or whatever path they want to be on one for graduate school. They have a very different motivation and very different buy-in than they do if they're doing their parents a favor. It might be kind of similar to think of it like chores, right? If you're cleaning your own apartment, you're probably cleaning it better than you were cleaning your room when your mom told you for the 17th time you have
Yep.
to go clean your room. And so it's not that they suddenly learned how to clean their room. It's now that their motivation is very different. So looking at a student's motivation is, I think, the first step. Because if they lack motivation, you could throw all the resources at them that you want, they're not going to pick them up, right? So that's kind of step one, is establishing motivation. And if they don't have the motivation, then either reviewing with them what college can do for them and giving them some more reality checks, or having the serious conversation about what other alternatives are there and can we think about how to get there in other pathways. Once you've kind of gotten the motivation stuff covered, I would talk to them about resources. And we were talking about this in our pre-conversation about entitlement, and kids sometimes come in with, I believe magic things should happen to me because I've arrived. And for those kids, teaching them having to actually work for resources and use the resources, and they're there and they're more than glad to help you, but they need to be elicited, right? I remember as I used to teach freshman orientation, and I needed to sign in a student into my class like with an overtally, and so I signed off on her paperwork and I leave it on my desk for her to pick up. I leave the class, it's still on my desk. I bring it back next week. I give it to her and I was like, "Oh, you forgot this." And she's like, "I was supposed to do something with it." And it almost didn't occur to her that there was an expectation that she does something. Because if they come from a world where everything was done for them, they have never been taught and or expected to do things for themselves, as compared to kind of kids who come from the other side of the world that are unaware of resources, right? They've had to do everything on their own. They've had to kind of fight the system tooth and nail. They get here and now they're still fighting the system tooth and nail instead of really understanding that there is help and there are options. You just need to know what they are. So, for example, when I was a college counselor, I had a requirement that the students see me twice a semester. There were kids who were in my office 7 times a week, right? Every time they had a thought, they felt the need to run it by me just in case I could guide them in some better direction. And then there were students who I spent the semester chasing down. And if I saw them in the hallway, I would not know who they were because I've never seen them. The same resources are available to both group of kids. They're not utilizing them the same way.
I certainly validate what you're saying about resources being available to all students because I know that in my first year seminar class with my students in college freshman year, I always tell them that there are so many resources that just come from their tuition, from the writing center to the tutoring center to the career center. And there are so many resources that are available to them. And I push them to go find them and use them because I say to them, you're paying for it anyway. So one of the things that I have them do is that every single week they have a task that enables them to go out and explore a new resource and report back as to how they were able to use it for the class by Sunday every week at 11:59 p.m. And on that topic, I think of Francis Schefter from the Stress-Free IEP, who also speaks about fighting the system tooth and nail, as you say, where especially, for example, with students that are working with IEPs or individual plans to help accommodate their learning, those students, like you mentioned, are very well attuned with the struggle. And then on the other side of that, as you said, we do have those that are looking for that quote unquote magic job where they are a little bit more unaware of the struggle because I'll admit that I was one of those students where I still did the work and I was fighting the system, but I still wanted my magic job. I thought the day I graduated, I'm going to get a job teaching high school English at my alma mater, and I will be there for 40 years. And every student that comes into my class will absolutely love me. And I will have a Mr. Holland's Opus auditorium when I retire with thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of students coming in for this wonderful banquet. And what a journey it will be along the way. And it wasn't until after I graduated where I actually taught at my former middle school, the feeder school to my high school for a couple months. And I'm like, well, wait a second, this isn't what I wanted. This is terrible. I can't
Right.
stand this. And so for students that are coming into our classes, kind of brushing off reality because they anticipate that magic job happening to them.
Mhm.
How do we work with that in terms of still using the classroom as a space to enable them so they're less disillusioned? They will probably still be disillusioned, but hopefully less so by the time they exit their university or their college setting.
So I think it's really breaking down steps because I think of most things as skill build, right? We're not born knowing how to go to college. We're not
Mhm.
born knowing how to get a job. So I think of most things as skill based that have to be taught. So how do you get a big goal, right? A job is a long-term goal with lots and lots of little steps, many of which need to be done today and tomorrow and the day after. So I would start backwards. Okay, if you want to be in this job, this is your dream job. Let's say you're going to be the CEO. Great. So there's very few people who graduate today and become CEO tomorrow. So what do the steps between graduation and CEO look like? Okay, great. We figured those out. And some of that may be informational interviewing, interviewing people in the field, doing some research, right? But again, doing things, right? Not sitting and waiting for the CEO to open up, but actually doing things. Okay, now we've figured out what is the first job you're likely to need in order to have that CEO job someday. Okay, what are the steps you need to be doing between where we are right now and the CEO and that first entry level job? Does that mean taking these classes? Does it mean learning public speaking? Does it mean improving your writing? What are the skills that we need in order for you to walk into that interview and be able to present in the best way possible, right? What do we need to teach you today to enable that you?
Definitely. And at the same time, we were also talking about situations when it comes to parenting from the in between as well. And one of your expertise is also working with families and parents. So let's go into that direction as well when we talk about parent burnout, where I also mentioned Dr. Dre Mata's the #2 parenting book as well, where Julie, something you also have worked with is students coming from situations where divorce is a factor in their family lives. So when it also comes to working with the families in our classrooms, what role do parents play in that? And what have you noticed about the different parental dynamics that are at play with those you've seen?
So I think parenting is a really broad topic, and I look at it both as a parent myself and in my clinical work working with parents, is the overarching emotion. If you ask most parents what they feel most often, it's guilt. And it doesn't really matter what you're doing, but you assume you're doing it wrong. because there's probably some element of society that is telling you you're doing it wrong and that there was some perfect way to do it and this one isn't it. So the first thing I try to do for parents is remove that burden, right? There is no right way to make your kid successful, right? And successful defined in that broadest sense of the word. We are looking to make functional adults. How do we help these people who are now kindergartners become functional adults someday? What kind of things do they need? And we think of the classroom and their school environment as the microcosm of their world, right? This is where they're going to learn most of their things. And that's everything from social environment to interactions with authority, to following directions, to time management, to I was told to bring home 3 folders, I brought home 2, everything from the rudimentary all the way to how do I envision these big goals and succeed at them. So I think for parents, one of the tasks is to understand really, and I think we talked very little about this in general in society, is almost your academic philosophy, right? You had mentioned earlier in our pre-chat about a student who believed college was a scam or college was a waste of time. He's getting that from somewhere, right? So if you yourself as the parent do not value academics, do not think that this is important, whether or not you had done it, right? And you have parents on both ends. You have parents with highly educated, like, that was the worst 20 years of my life. If you do not value your education, you're going to model that, even if you're not explicitly saying it, right? Let's say, and we get this a lot, you value sports, right? You think your kid is going to be a professional soccer player. And I say that because I have a kid who believes he's going to be a professional soccer player. And this is what you're investing all of your time and energy in. And let's say the kid is starting to fall behind in school because they have, I don't know, 30 hours of practice every week, but the only conversations you're having are ones that are like, well, you didn't work hard enough with a coach, and maybe you need to do this practice, you need to be doing that practice. The message that you're sending to them is your soccer is important and your schoolwork is not. Right. So what we need to first assess is, what do we believe about education? And I believe that people should be well-rounded. And the reason that I believe that is because of identity, right? Formation of a solid identity is something that people need to get as they age into their adulthood, right? And if they think of themselves as one thing, what the one thing fails or doesn't go the way you expected, it becomes really, really hard. This is seen a lot in, like, for women who are in the workforce and then become stay-at-home moms. And if they were very identified with their careers, now that that career is taken away, or they decide to give that career up, now who am I? Right? And really understanding that identity can be multifaceted and that we can think about ourselves in many different ways. So our children can think of themselves in many different ways. Yes, you're a student, but you're also a son or daughter, you're a brother or sister, you're a friend, you are the child who helped yesterday's kindergartner find their bus, right? There's all of these things that are part of you, and teaching them to build strengths in their areas of strength and compensate in their areas of weaknesses well enough to be able to function. I don't believe everybody needs to be equally good at everything. I do believe at building to strengths, but it's really understanding that there's so many elements of you and they're all worthwhile. So when parents intersect with the classroom, it's really understanding, how does my kid fit into this world? What skills are they lacking to fit into this world? What can I, as the parent, teach them in order to be able to fit well into this world? And I think one thing that becomes hard for parents is the idea of assertiveness, right? So we say kids should be assertive, and we want to talk to them about being able to advocate for themselves. And, you do poorly on the test, go talk to your teacher about why you did poorly, all of that stuff. And that seems important. And you've mentioned in several of your previous podcasts that in some ways, school environment's about compliance, not about advocacy. So you spend hours at home rehearsing with your third grader about what they're going to do to go ask Miss or Mr. So-and-so about this test. And they go there and they say exactly what you practice and they're told to sit down, right? So then what? How do you, as the parent, do you step in? But now you've undermined all of this self-advocacy that you were trying to foster. Do you reach out? Do you tell the kid to go try again? But you have no reason to think they're going to be any more successful the second time.
Sure.
But third, you have no idea what that kid actually said, Right? They could have said something completely inappropriate, not at all like what you rehearsed, right? So
And they
then
think it was correct when they said it.
right, exactly. So you're in this place that becomes really hard because you don't know what the right step is. And whatever the step is feels like the consequences of getting it wrong are almost worse than not doing anything. And I think very often that's why parents will pull back because it's, I don't know what to do. I don't want to make the situation worse, right? If this child is having conflict with the teacher, I think very often parents will say, no, you're not. And the kid will say, that teacher doesn't like me. Yes, they do. Everybody likes you. Well, that is certainly not true. Teachers are human. And if you are being disrespectful or you're not being wherever, or they just don't like, not everybody likes everybody, right? It is very possible that that teacher doesn't like you. Well, what we need to teach this child is how do you function in an environment where a teacher may not like you, right? Your grades aren't based on whether you're liked or not. Your grades are based on performance. Work really hard, do well, and it won't matter, right? But telling this kid, yes, that teacher does like you just invalidates their experience. And now we've created invalidation into now they don't know what to do. They clearly know that this teacher reacts to them differently than they do to other kids. And when they try what everybody else does, it doesn't work the same way. But you have produced no skills for them because you're denying their reality. So I think for parents, it's a really delicate balance between listening to what your kid is saying, possibly getting some input from the teacher. One of my favorite quotes from back to school night that a bunch of my kids' teachers have said that if you don't believe everything your kid says about us, we won't believe everything your kid says about you. Um, which I think is very true because everyone's got a story and you're not there. So you're making the best assumptions you can, but they're flawed. And you need to understand that your assumptions are flawed because if you go in guns blazing because your second grader told you that the teacher made him sit after class while everybody got to play, well, you might not be getting the full story, right? And in reverse, right? If the kid tells you the teacher doesn't like them, there may be more truth to it than you would like to think. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer to
No,
your
no,
question.
the hardest part about education, as I've seen it, both as a teacher and as a professor, and even as a substitute, was how often we run into not even misinformation, but incomplete information
Mhm.
that we use to form the whole story.
Yep, yep, yep. And then depending on how reactive the parent is and how identified they are with their child's struggles. And very often it's about, well, what does that say about me as a parent if my kid is not doing well? And then it
Hmm.
becomes about the parent and not about the kid. So I need you to do well in math because I'd like to be a parent of a kid who does well in math. Right? And then being careful about separating out what are your needs and your identity and what are the kids' needs and the kids' identity, right? Or if the kid is an introvert and is perfectly happy at sitting at recess with their one friend in the corner talking, but you're an extrovert and you believe they should be the life of the party and constantly pushing them to make friends with everybody and invite every kid in the class to their birthday party, and they're miserable, but you're doing you instead of doing them.
Right.
Right? It's really understanding what are the kids' needs. And if the teacher says, you know what, the two of them are at recess, but they're perfectly happy, they come back to after recess, are ready to work, I've never seen them upset, then maybe just accept that. And it's okay. It's okay. They're not like you.
When we speak about identity, I'm thinking about a conversation that by the time we record this has not yet been released. It's releasing tomorrow with Ron Yap, mental health CEO, also from Singapore, recommended to me by Leila Gucci-Lebrus, you've also heard on your own time as well. And what Ron Yap is currently working on is this idea of the inner hero, he calls it. And the inner hero is that part of your identity that has the happy ending, that knows how to get that story right, who is that teacher that people love and admire, who is that psychologist that is helping tens and thousands of patients and is able to reach that end goal and knows the steps to get there.
Mhm,
But one thing that Ron Yap talked about is how easily that identity can be altered due to life events. And on that
mhm,
same conversation, when it comes to parents, we feel that parents have a major influence on identity. And what are some circumstances or even consequences that we run into when identity is reshaped because of situations such as having divorced parents? What does that do for a child?
You may or may not be familiar with this research, but the old research, and this is what people always quote at you should stay together for the children because kids of divorce do worse than kids of married people. That is incorrect citing of research. What kids of divorce do better than, so kids of happily married people do better than kids of divorced people. However, kids who have divorced parents did not have happily married parents. They had
Mhm.
miserably married parents. And kids of divorce do better than kids of miserably married parents.
Mhm.
And the problem that children encounter post-divorce isn't the divorce, it is parents' inability to parent, right?
Right.
You're either overwhelmed, you're depressed, you have financial difficulties, you have no time, you're overly permissive because you feel guilty. It isn't the divorce, it's what are the parents doing with that? And that obviously spills over into academics, because if you have guilt about the fact that they live in two households and now they're coming home and they haven't done a project over the weekend, well, because they were with their other parent, and you're saying, but that's okay. I know it's really stressful over there. It's okay that you didn't get anything done. We'll figure it out, right? And now you're not really holding them to the standards you would have normally held them to. So, an education sometimes kind of falls through the cracks. I'm involved in all elements of divorce. I do something called collaborative divorce, which is its own kind of story, which really brings everybody to the table and helps two attorneys, a mental health professional, and a financial neutral, and you all kind of sit around the table and help this family come up with a solution that is just right for their family. And what that allows me to do as the mental health neutral in the room is really do a lot of education for the parents, what to say to the children, when to say to the children, how to say to the children, what not to say to the children, and help the parents not make the child the pawn to be pulled back and forth. And what I often say to parents is you are going to potentially disagree about academics, even if you were happily married. So don't blame everything on the divorce, right? Focus on what is important for your child. And very often, the negative impacts that we talk about with divorce and children isn't really about the divorce. It's about, can the parents parent as effectively as they had done before? So the first job is to help parents go back to parenting. Divorce or not, your first job in the space of parenting is to actually do the work, and
Mhm.
do the work in the way you believed it was important to do the work before we got to this divorce stage. The second thing is we talk a lot about co-parenting, and that's the buzzword. And very
Yes.
often, parents couldn't co-parent when they were married. That's why they're getting divorced, right? So that is very often a tall order. So what we really do is teach parents in the beginning, at least, to parallel parent, which is where everybody parents on their own parenting time without interfering with the other person's parenting time. So if there's a project that takes a week to do and your kid's spending half the week with you and half the week with the other parent, you early on identify where each person is going to get the kid to, and then leave them to do their work. You're not assuming they're not going to do it. You're not assuming that they've done that for the child and therefore the child doesn't know what to do. No assumptions. Just let them parent on their time with the expectation that each parent wants the best for the child. They may have a different way of getting there, but they want the best as well. And that what you're doing now is being complementary, right? If one parent is really thinks that, I don't know, academics are important and is going to spend all their time studying for the spelling test, and the other parent thinks sports are really important and are going to give them the extra 2 hours of basketball practice, both of those things are great. And just because they're not doing the same thing doesn't mean that's a problem. That just means the kid gets more, right? And we always say the more people who love the child in a productive way, the better for the child, right? It's not a competition of who loves them more or spends more time with them. It's how do we fill this bucket of the child with more good stuff? Parents
Mm.
get all uptight about making sure that there's consistency, but again, they're having a really hard time on agreeing on some really basic stuff. So
Right.
what I say to parents is kids have no trouble remembering that at school you raise your hand to go to the bathroom and at home you could just go. Kids really can remember how to function in more than one environment and be fine, because consistency only needs to exist really in its own environment.
Yes, very true. And so then when we talk about the way that parenting functions within schools as to how we see it, when you've been doing work with families, you often see how support works across this line of overcorrection. And in our pre-talk, you also spoke about some firsthand experiences between teachers to your children. We have also been working between both students that you're working with at this time, right? And when it comes to overcorrection and trying to help, what are some ways that you've seen just how the system responds to, like we mentioned earlier, advocacy, accountability, vulnerability, and what do students need? What do both students need? What do teachers need? And what do parents all need in that space to make it effective for the learner?
So I think visibility is probably the first step that I think would be helpful if everybody knew what the expectations are and what those expectations look like we were talking about earlier, that if there's a process for submitting homework, it is helpful for parents to know what that process looks like. So that at home, when we finish homework and we put it in this folder, I can say, so tomorrow when you walk into the class, this piece of paper goes into the homework bucket or whatever it is that the process is. But if I don't know there's a homework bucket, I can't be that source of reminding, right? Or I've had a teacher put a sticky on my son's bag that said, bring these three things home, right? And it was stapled to his bag. And he knew that those three things need to come home so that I could check, did you put the three things that were on your sticky, right? But I needed to know that sticky existed. And that was the method for conveying the material that needed to come home. So it's visibility across the environments is one thing that I think is helpful. The second thing about overcorrection is, again, it's about a match, right? All relationships are dynamic, as are the relationship between students and teachers, parents and teachers, students and parents, right? So what works for one child may be the exact opposite of what works for another child. And the example I given you earlier is my kids are 5 years apart and had the same teacher in second grade. And she was not a good match for my daughter, who was a very independent learner and just kind of needed to be left to her own devices. And to her, it felt like interference. So she would be very resistant, versus for my son, who really needed that hand holding and was an excellent match for him. And he thrived in her class. So, same teacher, probably doing things very much the same way, was creating these two very different reactions. So, what I think would be amazing, and I get how stressed and tired and overstretched teachers are, and same for parents, but to have that conversation about what can we do all together. And in one of your other podcasts on the stress-free IEP, she talks about putting together one pager about your child. This is what my child needs. This is what they do to succeed. This is what they are likely to struggle with. And if a teacher kind of has that, that would be helpful. And I think we give parents some opportunity to do that, but we don't have that in reverse. Here's what your student is struggling with in my class, or here's what they're doing really well in my class. And can you support this? Or there's a little bit of a delay here, not even necessarily academically, but like they have a hard time with transitions. Can you work with them on their transitions? Or, what do you do at home for when they need to transition from playing video games to going to sleep or whatever it is that they're doing with themselves, right? How do you get them to go from a desired task to an undesired task or the reverse, right? Because those aren't the same things, which we also forget, right? It's a lot easier to transition from classwork to recess than from recess to classwork. Those are not the
Yeah.
same things. And maybe we need to put different things in place for that or teach them different skills. So really thinking about identification of skills in all of the environments based on that specific child or children who are kind of like that.
I love that idea of skill building between classrooms and families being the best way to put it. Because even at my level in the university, I will tell students on day one, I'll say, these are my practices. Every day that we have a class, we're going to get we talk about things happening like magic, a pre-drafted email like magic that will tell you exactly what we did on that day. It will come out randomly about 23 minutes after class to make it feel more in the moment, but I truly drafted it in July before the term even began, and I just know how to stick to it at this point. You will get an email. This is what we covered. Here's the agenda. I will give check-ins, but at the same time, it's like their first assignment is to tell me, even at 19, 20 years old, what do you need? Give me one thing that you need from me to help you feel supported and seen and successful throughout the semester. And I think even if we do that at all levels in K-12 with 150 students, I wouldn't call that differentiation. I would call that just supporting best practices that can help each student feel enabled.
But also teaching kids to self-reflect, right?
Yeah.
Teaching kids that they know themselves. It's not external people, mom, dad, teacher, that knows necessarily what they need. It's really understanding what is it inside them. And it's interesting. I was having this conversation with my son, who's almost 11, and he said to me, well, why can't my method ever be the right one? And I said that, well, because you're 11 and you didn't invent math, but I understand that frustration, right? I understand the desire to have some advocacy, but its ability to make the world work the way you want them for once, right? Their world works always top down. And there's this desire to make the world sometimes work bottom up. Why can't I put something in place that will be just okay? And so when we talk about, well, maybe it's a place. There are places you can put things in place that are just okay. It's just not in math class, right? So where do we find a place for you to have that kind of power? Right? Maybe it's among your friends. Maybe it's in how you organize your stuff. Maybe it's in the way you keep your room, right? But in math class, the teacher gets to tell you the right way. So it's really figuring out how to match power to the environment also.
Definitely. And when it comes to just understanding how therapeutic methods work, and I cringe when I say the word therapeutic on my podcast because I want teachers to know that the classroom is not therapy as well.
Mhm.
But in terms of methods that we've seen in practice, what are some of the models of meaningful change that we've seen to really help parents, students, and families all come together? And as you said, teaching families that there isn't just one way to do it. What are some of the different solutions that you tell them about, ways to make a classroom most effective?
So the strongest thing is probably modeling, right? We model the behavior we want to see. So if we want students to speak respectfully, we need to speak respectfully to students because I can't be interrupting you and then expect you not to be interrupting me, right? Because that is not the behavior I just modeled. I can't be, when parents get like, I can't be on my phone and then while you're talking and then expect you to pay attention to me, right? I can't tell you, okay, we'll do it in 5 minutes every time you come and ask me a question. But the minute I ask you to transition to a different task, I expect it to be done that second, right? So really reflecting on what are we modeling for kids and how well aligned is it with the things that we're expecting of them, right? The other one is straightforward conditioning. Behavior that's rewarded will be repeated. Behavior that is punished will not be repeated. So if we want a student to behave in a particular way, but all we notice is when they do it wrong, we're not encouraging them to do the right things. We're just encouraging them to find a different wrong thing to do because we didn't tell them what the right path was. And we talk about it in parenting, I'm sure it's talked about in education, like catch the kid doing the right thing. But it's hard because people are busy and that doesn't stand out as much, right? Our brains aren't as attuned to noticing good as they are noticing bad, right? You're not going to notice the kid sitting at their desk nicely doing their work. You're going to notice the kid who just fell out of their chair. But again, then what are we reinforcing? So for me, it's really thinking about like what behavior do I want to see repeated and how do I go about setting up the kind of reinforcements that will in fact reinforce it. And kids have different approaches to reinforcement, right? Some kids are punishment averse, which means they don't care about all the stuff get taken away. You can take away recess and you take away this, and it does not have any impact on their behavior because that is not what their thing is. So it's really talking to the student and what is important to them and what would they like to see happen and what kind of things would encourage them to do that and what kind of things would discourage them from doing that. And I think kids are much more insightful and smart than adults often give them credit for.
Yes, I thought you said an adults period. Yes, than what we give them credit for
Right, because I
certain.
think we often don't realize that there are legitimate sources of information about themselves. We just need to know how to hear it and be willing to hear it, even if it conflicts with what we believe they should be thinking about themselves. Like if you say to a kid, well, do you think you're smart? And they say no, and you say, of course you are. Well, that kid just told you something very different about themselves that you've overridden instead of just saying, well, what makes you say that? How does somebody know whether they're smart? What does being smart mean? So it's less important for you to talk them out of their opinion than to understand where their opinion came from.
Absolutely. Fully agreed. And then in terms of the work that you're continuing to do, what haven't we talked about yet today that was on your mind for our conversation?
So I think I want to talk a little bit about frustration tolerance because I
Yes.
feel like that's the unspoken, very often underlying problem very frequently. Like if I can impart one thing at parents is teach kids frustration tolerance.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
as a parent of a kid who is very low frustration tolerance, I have two, I have a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old. My 10-year-old has a hard time with frustration tolerance. If something doesn't go well, the world will come crashing down right now.
Hmm.
And it is irreparable and it will be in pieces forever. And really trying to give him the skills of, yes, you can be upset, but there's recovery, there's paths, there's ways
Yes.
of functioning in a world, even if it is not up to your standards, right? So I steal quotes and I can't remember who said them. Excuse my inability to cite things. The researcher in me is like, no, 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 we don't do that. But the quote is, the world owes you nothing. It was here first,
Yes. Yep. Yep.
right?
Yep. Mhm.
And that is something that I think we've lost, right? It is your job to adjust to the world, not the world's job to adjust to
Just
you,
to you. Totally.
right? And what do you do when you do have to do that adjustment? Like, it's certainly great if the world works the way you like it. But what
Mhm.
happens when it doesn't? Because more often than not, it doesn't, because there's lots of people in the world and it can't do what everybody wants, right? Because some people's wants are conflicting. So it can't do both at the same
Exactly.
time. And that's the kid that you have thrashing around on the floor, screaming, I hate you, or any variation of the theme, where they have now completely shut down. Their frontal cortex is flooded. Their thinking is offline. Now they're just reacting. And what that is this stressor overtaxed their coping abilities, right? And they're not acting this way because they want to be a pain. They're acting this way because they really have no better options. So, really understanding what that moment feels like for kids and putting direct skills in place. So, everything from breathing to taking a walk to maybe just sitting quietly, or on the other side, doing some hard exercises, jumping jacks. Your goal is first to get your brain back online, and then we can do all sorts of other things. I can't talk to you if your brain isn't working, right? So I can have all sorts of brilliant ideas, but if you are right now not in thinking mode, you're just in reacting mode, my words are meaningless, right? So let's focus on helping you tolerate a little bit more of things going wrong. And also talking to kids about, so why is things going wrong such a problem? Why can't we tolerate something going wrong? Why must things go the way that you want them to go? The world doesn't actually have to function the way you'd like it to.
About that. Very well said. And one of the things that I struggle with, especially in that first year seminar class, is just the resistance factor from
Mhm.
students, where I internalize that, where they come in and they put their heads down and they don't participate. It's like, woe is me, they hate my class. Where I learned, well, no, woe is not me. They are just really struggling with their mental health and their transition, and it's spilling into their academics in ways that are beyond me. And if I
Mhm.
want to help, I can, but sometimes I don't know how because I'm not trained.
Or they got pushed into going to college, which was not the right choice for them, and
Oh,
now they're
yeah.
biding time until they can legitimately drop out. There's an author, I always blank on her name. Her first name's Lisa and her last name is something with a D. She's a psychologist and she writes about parenting. She wrote two books about parenting teenage girls, and then she just recently wrote a book about parenting in general. She's
Mhm.
amazing. But her second book's called Under Pressure, and it is parenting high achieving girls. And it's all that, like, yeah, they look great on paper, but at
Mhm.
what cost? Right?
Yeah,
How many hours are they sleeping? What are they doing to their bodies? What is that internal dialogue on what it means to not have an A plus, right? God forbid
right.
an A, right? And a lot of this is supported by our world, right? And for example, I think I'm going to misquote her example, but she gives like, if a high achiever comes to you and asks for an extension, your
Mhm.
reaction isn't the same as it would be for somebody else. It's more like, well, how come you don't have it together, right?
Mhm.
Almost supporting again for that narrative for them that they're not allowed to have flaws. They're not allowed to have any leeway. It has to be all perfection all the time. And then I think somebody, maybe Lila on one of your podcasts said that if you're performing at
Mhm.
120% every
Yes,
day,
your
right?
100% is not
When
good enough.
right, then
Yep,
when you get to 100, everyone's like, well, what's today about? Like, what are you doing?
yep,
Right?
yep.
And I think that that's important also to teach kids like the work smarter, not harder,
Mhm.
is assess which areas need 100%, which areas can probably be okay at 80. And
Yep.
maybe today it's 80 and tomorrow it's 100. It just depends on what it is. One of the talks I do is on the myth of work-life balance, because that's like the catchphrase, right? And you can't work as part of life, so you can't balance a part against the whole, right?
Yes,
And so what you're really talking about is prioritization. It's on that day, what is the most pressing thing and how is my time best used, right?
exactly.
And having that flexibility and thought around, well, where am I at my best? And how do I do things
Mhm.
today that gives the world the best of me? Is that
Exactly.
today my job? Is that today my family? Is that today my friends? Where am I at my best today?
there is that myth about balancing as well. One of my other tasks that I have students do is the self-care wellness balance journal, where they don't really
Mhm.
understand what it is
Mm-mm.
because of how abstract it's supposed to be, where I say, go away for 30 days at a time. And on the first day of every month, tell me what you did for the last 30 days and the month before through any way you'd like, through journals, through pictures, through slideshows, through videos, through you talking to a camera for a few minutes. Just give me a laundry list of moments that really maximized your time and made it count.
Mhm.
And they look at it like it's like a term paper or a project. They are so stressed out about that. And
Mhm.
I still can't understand all these years later why that's so hard for
And
them.
so I have a depressed client who I have her send me, we're not doing it right now, but there was a point in which I was having her send me 3 positive moments, thoughts, whatever, a
There you
day.
go. Yep.
It could be a picture of a flower. It could
Hmm.
be a picture of your kid's completed homework. It could have been your made bed. I don't care what it is. 3 moments in the day that made your brain say, this is good.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
our brains by default are wired to look for bad, right? Because
Hmm.
evolutionary, it is much more adaptive to remember bad things than good things. It is much more useful to know where the lion sleeps than where the pretty flowers grow. So
Yes.
our brains are predisposed to both notice bad and remember bad. We have to train our brains to pay attention to the positive, right? So if I asked her to give me 10 bad things that happened on that day, no problem. Take her seconds, right? But coming up with 3 good ones, and then she felt like her entire day she was working to make sure she gives me the 3 good ones. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
this is an exercise in attention, not in creation,
Exactly.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
And the same thing for them. What they're not doing is being able to reflect on themselves enough to be
Mhm.
able to say, this makes me feel good. I enjoyed that, right? And
Yeah.
again, we don't necessarily teach those things, right?
Hmm.
We teach happiness, but that's a very different construct. And it is like my kids will say to me, especially my little one, like, that doesn't make me happy. And I'm like, well, that's great because I wasn't looking to make you happy. I was looking to teach you to be a functional adult someday.
Right.
If you happen to be happy in the process, that's great. I'm happy for you. But that happiness in and of itself is not a goal,
Right.
it's a byproduct, right? Living a
Yeah.
purposeful life leads to happiness. It's not that the kids want to do right or wrong, is that something doesn't go the way they want it to because they had a clear idea of how they wanted to have things go. And then it doesn't. And now what? Right?
It reminds me of the work of Bessel van der Kolk, where the body's keeping score. And at the same time, when I see the same thing in my classrooms, I look at the student who's sleeping and I look at the student who just does not seem happy to be there that day. And I want to think, oh, it's just their nervous system talking. But because I internalize that so much, it's like, oh, they're sleeping because I'm boring. Therefore, and so for
Mm-hmm.
teachers that are seeing behaviors like that, it seems so practical when we talk about it on a platform here like this as such, but when we're actually doing the practice in the classroom, it's a lot harder to
Mm-hmm.
go about not internalizing that or doing so in a way that can still be productive for the student. So what advice do you have to our listeners, me included, and your host, in terms of how to not internalize those types of nervous system responses?
So it's everything from even more basic. So a kid, in the middle of their tantrums, kid is screaming, I hate you. You're the worst mom, dad in the world, right? Well, you're not the worst mom or dad in the world, but that is certainly very believable in the moment because you have a kid who is screaming in the middle of a supermarket, right? And everybody's looking at you like you're the worst parent in the world, right? Because we are not very good at being supportive of people in the moment of their distress. So it's always good, like in moments like that, the person you want to approach, if you feel the need to approach somebody, is the parent, not the kid, right? And that's who needs your support in the moment. So it's really helping people understand that they cannot control the behavior of others, right? They didn't cause that behavior. We are the messengers, we're not the actors. We're not inside other people's brains. We cannot do them. What they're having is a reaction to something we did. So I said, you have to do your homework, and now you're kicking and screaming on the floor because I'm the worst mom. But I didn't make you say those things. I created the environment you didn't want. And as a response, you're now saying these things, right? So as a teacher, you have a kid who is asleep. You didn't make them asleep because you're boring. They are asleep for whatever their reasons are. You may or may not be boring, right? Those are just two independent things. Just like if they stayed awake does not necessarily mean you're not boring, right? They could be writing shopping lists in their head for all you know.
They are.
Right? So it's really decoupling the idea of your actions cause something. No, your actions create the environment and other people react to that environment. And there may be a million reasons why people react to that environment. But also in therapy, we use the phrase, what evidence do you have? So if you have a
Yes,
class of
yes.
30 people and two are asleep, are you just much more boring to those two, but you're okay on the 28th? Like, so maybe, like, so what does that mean? You have to up your game by 5%? Like, well, how do you interpret that? Right? Because if you were boring and that had one impact on everybody, then you would expect a class of 30 asleep kids. Or it just really maybe because you teach at 7 a.m. and nobody really wants to hang out in your class at 7 a.m., right? But it was the last class available because they're freshmen and they get to register last, right? So there's a million reasons that you could be seeing something, but it's really understanding that we create the environment and everybody else reacts to it. And it's the dynamic interplay between the environment and your actions and the person's reactions. It's the thing that sits in the middle.
So we are receiving a reaction. We are not enabling a reaction.
Right. You're not causing it, right?
Cause-
It's like you make me angry. No, you make you angry. I just made you do homework,
Mhm,
right? And in
mhm.
every given situation, you choose something. And it's also important to teach kids that just because you chose that the last 50 times, it does not mean you have to choose it again, right?
Yeah.
And I talk to like my kids a lot about reputation, right? If you've created the reputation of the class clown, yeah, everyone's going to kind of expect you to be the class clown. But that doesn't mean you have to continue to be the class clown, right? You can start acting differently and teach people to think differently about you because any behavior that you can learn, you can also unlearn, right? Because we weren't born class clowns.
Yes,
So we can unlearn to be the class clown.
absolutely. This conversation has been so much fun. I've loved having this conversation with you, Dr. Davelman. And for our listeners, what would you say is a major takeaway for them as well? And before we even get there, what other topics have we not addressed yet that was on your mind for today, if available?
I think we got pretty much everything just because these are such broad topics and
Yes.
everybody struggles with them every day, right? They're everything from how do you get your kid to put on their shoes so they don't miss the bus to, the more global, oh my God, my kid needs to get into Harvard. And if they don't get into Harvard, how are they ever going to live? Right. And every conversation in between. So I think there is many, many different conversations to be had about expectations and about how do we enable our kids or inspire our kids while not just giving them our own set of values, be like, here, do this because I said you should do that. But I think that, maybe a conversation for a different time, because I think that today was really focusing on helping parents and teachers really lower the guilt. And maybe one last construct to introduce is the concept of good enough parenting. I'm sure it applies to good enough teachering as well. But there is a concept of good enough parenting, which means that generally, if you provide for children's basic needs, they turn out okay. What we call successful or happy children are really like exceptional children on the bell curve. So if we do kind of what feels authentically right and are, feeding our children and not abusing them and having, providing consistent shelter, they'll be okay, right? Everything on top of that is just whipped cream on top.
Absolutely. And for teachers as well, I think one of the most important things that we can do is just focus on that Maslow over Bloom, where we do
Mhm.
create that space that's welcoming, caring. And I've said this from different sections of my book, only because I write my professor and my end of the year student evaluations advocate for the same. So when we talk about psychology, I do have my evidence on this. Students tell me that they remember that I was creating conditions that made them feel seen, visible, and cared for
Mhm.
more than they actually remembered our stories, what they wrote about, and what rhetoric is. And I'm
Mhm.
okay with that. I think if
Right.
they got the content, that was above and beyond. But the fact that they
Right.
remember me as somebody who cared for them along their college journey, I'm more than happy with that.
Right. And if 3 years from now they're having a decision about, a career pivot and can they do this or what does this field look like, they will know, okay, this person is approachable. I can go to him and ask my question and he's not going to look at me like I have six heads. Right. And it's that lasting connection that you want to formulate and leave for the student that they know. Oh, and I get it that college students are adults, but they're like almost adults, but that
Yeah.
adults are approachable and
Mhm.
that you can ask questions and that it's okay. So I think that's also a really important point of what you've been able to
Absolutely.
do.
my greatest joy, and like we mentioned before, that whenever we send a letter of recommendation, it's our name and it's our reputation that
Mm-hmm.
goes on that letter. So I do handpick as cautiously as I'm able to. But one of my greatest joys is seeing a student who is successful. There is that difference.
Mm-hmm.
A successful student
Mm-hmm.
return to me and think of me, of all the humans that they've interacted with in the time since they've taken the class with me, some 3 to 5 years later on,
Mm-hmm.
come to me and ask for my endorsement to enable their success. That is one of my greatest pleasures of what I do in this field.
Mm-hmm. Like my dissertation had two, the thing that isn't acknowledgments, the other thing where you thank people. But for two people who were very influential in my career, one was my mentor and employer when I was in college going into grad school. He was a psychologist who I was no longer really in touch with by the time my dissertation was done, but actually reconnected with him years later and was able to kind of give him that page. And the other one was my internship mentor who was very actively involved in that stage because I thought that they were very influential to different, very pivotal parts of my career. And those things mattered, even though it was many, many years later. And I wanted them to know it mattered.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I also have to think about as a teacher is like when it comes to impact, I have to remember that just because, and again, I'm a very black and white OCD thinker, but when it comes to teaching, I had to remember that just because a student doesn't write to me every single day for 10 years doesn't mean that they don't remember me and they don't like me. Or I
Yep.
would sit here
Yep.
today and I would tell you that nobody from a class in 2019, my first year, 7 years ago, has ever contacted me again, and it makes me feel sad. But truth be told, one of them just, liked a picture I took walking around Van Cortlandt Park last week. Oh, look at the
Mm-hmm.
leaves changing. One of them liked the picture, and somebody else sent me, I guess, an Instagram story because we're all on my Instagram. They sent me an
Mm-hmm.
Instagram story of them and their classmates seated together having coffee and said, "Oh, we were thinking of your class." And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
just because it's not every day, it could be 3 years apart.
Yep.
I'm still there.
Yep. Right.
And I don't
Exactly.
write to my favorite teachers every day of the week, but they still
Right.
know I love them.
Nor do they really want to hear from you every day of the
Yeah,
week, I bet, because they have to hear from their current students, and that is taxing enough.
exactly. Exactly.
But also teaching people to show gratitude. Like we're no longer kind of in the world of thank you notes, right? But teaching people to show gratitude when something matters and to show, like, I've had this conversation with my kids and their coaches, right? If you had a really hard game and your coach got you through that piece, you owe them a thank you, right? They didn't have to
Mhm.
do that. Their job is to make sure you kick the ball right. It's not necessarily to help you struggle with your internal sense of self, but they did that for you, so they deserve a thank you. And it's kind of turning around later and saying, "Hey, I really appreciated you took the time to do that." I think is important rather than like
Absolutely.
your teacher appreciation weeks, which I think have become somewhat commercialized and don't have nearly the kind of meaning that some of these more personalized things really have. As much as it's now teacher appreciation week, isn't it?
Yeah, today.
Yeah,
Mhm.
there we go. We're in teacher
Yes.
appreciation week. So yes, we definitely appreciate our teachers, but I think the thing that may be more meaningful than just like the classroom gift bought by the classroom mom
Mhm.
is those small things like that specific thing you did for me really made a difference.
Mhm. Something I started more recently than not is that I know when all my teachers' birthdays are. And like
Mm-hmm.
my kindergarten teacher, my first grade teacher, I will contact them every year at least if not more, on their actual birthday and let
Oh,
them know where I am in my life. And this is the first year that students actually did that to me on my birthday a few weeks ago. And it was really profound to see that be like a full
yeah.
circle moment. And that's what made my day so special is seeing what I'd done for years and how on my special day, quote
Right.
unquote, how it's impacted other people that I tried to put that onto. So that was really
Did
cool to
you
see.
tell them you do that? Like, or did they come to that all on their own?
They came
Like,
to that on their own. Just like for me, it's like I
that's
have a
really
calendar
cool.
brain. So it's a coincidence. Like, oh, I'm going to write my first grade teacher on September 13th. And every year.
That's really cool. I don't think I know when my teachers' birthdays were. They're gonna make me like go reconstruct that.
Yeah.
I'm sure Facebook would be more than glad to tell me all about it.
Yes. And so, what would you say is one major takeaway message for our audiences today?
Take a deep breath. It is that hard, right? I think the other problem, and we didn't talk about kind of the social media part of this world, but very often we make it look or we tell parents like they're genetically supposed to just know how to do this. And one of my favorite cartoons, and I really like cartoons, is Home. And if you're familiar with that cartoon, the aliens are coming to take over the world, and a
Mhm.
little alien befriends a girl, and they're trying to like build this relationship. And he, at some point, she gets really upset, and he comes out and he tells her that he doesn't understand her. And he has this phrase that says, humans are much more complicated than it said in the manual. And I use that phrase a lot. Humans are just much more complicated than it said in the manual. So it's really giving yourself grace around that, and that you're not always going to get it right. You're not even going to get it right 95% of the time. But you try, and you try different things. And if you can keep focused on the fact that there is a value to trying, and there are resources, and you can build skills in kids, and you can build skills in yourself, right? So for me, it was building the skill of how do you parent a kid who has low frustration tolerance, because I didn't need that skill before, and now I do. So it's really kind of understanding that the pie just gets bigger. And if you keep adding to the pie, it will be okay at the end. It won't be pretty, but it will be okay.
Absolutely. One of the greatest epiphanies that I've had about writing my own book is that I am aware, I was never told why, but I've been able to piecemeal over the course of 7 years, because trauma takes time to settle, that my dismissal from my first year of teaching came down to me feeling the need to literally rescue and be a savior for my students. And there were a few handful of students in particular that I literally could not sleep at night, because I wanted to make sure that between the hours of 3 p.m. and 9 a.m. the next day, that they would feel safe and, rescued by. And I realized that 7 years later, those are actually the students who just contacted me on my birthday, those same ones. And they are now doing exceptional in college, years after I have had them for 8th grade middle school. And I didn't get it right my first time. And what I learned is that I didn't have to. I didn't have to get it right my first try. I just needed to show them that I was present and I cared enough. And that's what they remember. And that's why they still talk to me consistently.
And the other thing that we were talking about modeling before is you model repair. It's okay for a parent to say, you know what, I got really frustrated with you yesterday when I was trying to help you with math homework. That's on me. It is easier for me to help you when you're listening, but it's really up to me to control my emotions, regardless of what's happening, right? Because you didn't cause me to become angry. So I'm going to work harder on maintaining my cool. I'd like you to work harder on listening, right? And being able to model that it's okay to admit that you made a mistake. It's okay to say, here's what I'm going to do. You know, when we talk about apologizing, we talk about it kind of in 3 parts. You say you're sorry, like actually say the words, but say what you're sorry for. And most importantly, what is going to be different the next time, right? So it's not an apology if it doesn't have those 3 pieces. So modeling that for kids is really important as well.
Definitely, from all levels of the system. Where can our listeners learn more about you?
So you can find me on our practice website. It's Abram Psychological Services. And I'm also on Facebook as Dr. Julie Davelman, and people can find me that way. I also have a blog. It's Can This Help You? It's on WordPress.
And I discovered Dr. Davelman when I was perusing on the Facebook group, Find a Guest, Be a Guest on Facebook. And there was a post that was looking for mental health speakers. And I just started looking at profiles, and Dr. Davelman stuck out to me because we come from the same alma mater.
Right.
Well, Dr. Davelman, I love this conversation. Thank you so much, Julie, and being able to take us away from perfectionism and speaking more towards what makes us more aware within systems. And there isn't one right way to support a child, as we said, but there also is not one right decision. But there is a difference between acting out of pressure and acting with intention. If there's one thing to take from this conversation, support doesn't come from just trying to get it right. It comes from understanding what shapes our choices and why we make them in the first place. So, Julie, thank you so much for your perspective and for the clarity you brought to our conversation.
Thank you for joining us on the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast. If today's episode inspired you or made you think differently, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or review wherever you listen to podcasts, and stay connected with us on the @Classroom Narratives podcast over Instagram and Facebook. Remember, together we can transform our scars into stars in education, one conversation at a time.